China is making the news more and more often these days, with talks of Communist Party spies in parliament, schools, and Chinese imperialism. It is a concern to all of us. What is now a cold war of trade and espionage could easily turn into a hot war overnight. In fact, it is likely that this will happen in the not too distant future, given world economic and geopolitical conditions. The Chinese economy is one giant financial Ponzi scheme, just like the rest of the world, and the Communist Party leadership must know this. Hence, the recent push to expand their sphere of influence around the world. Taking over new territories, thus control of resources, is fundamental to Chinese survival. If China does not expand, it will collapse under the weight of its own corrupt system. Ultimately, their system will die either way, as it is parasitic by design, but at least in the short term, the ruling parasite class can enjoy the benefits of their parasitism. It is an age-old strategy for parasitic ruling classes to run up debts, then start wars when they cannot pay. Expansion is obviously the Chinese plan, but this is foolish and doomed to failure for one very important reason. The entire world is now reliant on increasingly globalized trade and a usury-based financial Ponzi scheme. A world war started by an expansionist China puts this house of cards under direct threat. Sure, China might have supersonic missiles capable of taking out American aircraft carriers, but they stole this technology from America in the first place. That means if China were to take out the entire US Navy, America would return the favour and the seas return to the lawlessness of the 17th and 18th centuries. Thank you so much for watching so far. I promise the content will resume in a moment. This work relies on the generosity of loyal fans to support it, and the best way you can do that, other than sharing the video, is by heading over to RRTV and making a pledge. Not only does this support my work, but it supports a number of independent creators. The added bonus being you get access to a small but growing pool of exclusive RRTV content with any pledge. Thank you so much for your support. Now, back to the important stuff. Arrgh. The current anti-China protests in Hong Kong represent a real threat to Chinese central authority and highlight a key difference in attitudes of mainlanders compared to the Cantonese. While mainlanders, for now, mostly submit to an all-powerful central authority, likely due to communist purges among other things, Hong Kong's history was very different. For 99 years, to 1997, it was a British-owned asset. The locals lived under and learned under British common law. They gained many things, including the desire for individual sovereignty. Since returning to Chinese communist control, the central government in Beijing has slowly increased its influence over the territory. The agreement was one country, two systems, but anyone who understands geopolitical politics and the nature of the Chinese dragon knows this is a fantasy. China were always going to try and take full, unchallenged control of the island and new territories of the region we call Hong Kong. It was only a matter of time unless the Cantonese managed to stand up and take sovereignty back for themselves. Unfortunately, rather than learn from the patience of the Blues, it appears they made an error in their desire to extradite criminals to the mainland. This proved a bridge too far for the local Cantonese, who took to the streets in mass protest. The police responded with violence, and the protests continue in one way or another to this day. Time will tell how the communist imperial government respond to this clear challenge of their authority, but we can see one thing. China is far from a unified nation. After a century of British rule of law, the Cantonese are obviously willing to stand against imperial aggression, but this only shows the true nature of the Chinese Empire. Contrary to the image of purity the party presents, China is a deeply divided land with each territory made of its own distinct ethnic group using its own language. It would not take much for the entire country to break apart, and without the resources gained through Western trade, this would happen very quickly. The drive towards expansionist imperialism is an acknowledgement of this internal weakness, and it is now clear that China intends to conquer Australia, or at least exert power over us to extract our resources. ASIO are even warning us that they are investigating allegations of a Chinese plot to install party assets in Australian Parliament. From the Australian, quote, ASIO Director General of Security Mike Burgess has issued a rare statement confirming that the spy agency was aware of allegations that China tried to infiltrate the Australian Parliament by installing an asset in a Melbourne-based seat. 9 newspapers and the 60 Minutes program have reported that Australian authorities were investigating claims that a Chinese espionage ring tried to install Nick Zhao, a luxury car dealer, in a seat in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne and offered $1 million to bankroll his campaign. Mr. Zhao was found dead in a Melbourne hotel room in March after disclosing the approach made to him by China to ASIO, end quote. This means there is a strong suspicion that the Chinese government are attempting to undermine our nation by infiltrating political parties with their own assets. ASIO made a statement regarding the allegations, essentially refusing to comment until they have finalised their investigation. China denied the allegations vehemently and called the individual whistleblower a liar, but they would say that, wouldn't they? It is possible, however, that China already succeeded in their plans to do this. Liberal MP Gladys Liu has strong connections to the Chinese Communist Party and is currently sitting in Parliament in the exact same seat targeted in the plot exposed by 60 Minutes. From the Sydney Morning Herald, quote, Liberal backbencher Gladys Liu has admitted that she was a member of a Chinese government propaganda unit in a sudden shift in position that has deepened a dispute over her loyalty to Australia. The federal government has closed ranks around the first-term Victorian MP, dismissing allegations of her links to Beijing as offensive, as it was forced to mop up a disastrous television appearance where she could not answer questions over her ties to Beijing. Having previously denied any association, Ms. Liu confirmed she was an honorary member of the Guangdong provincial chapter of the China Overseas Exchange Association between 2003 and 2015. At that time, the association was an arm of the Chinese government's central political and administrative body. End quote. Such is the inevitable result of the relentless lie that is multiculturalism. This was always the plan: allow outsiders into the seats of power and take over our country, all with a view to one day bringing us under the control of a one-world government. 6, 6 and 6. Traitors opened the gates, and now the enemy is flooding in and destroying all in its path. This is of great concern, but is entirely expected. Also in the same seat, Box Hill, the local police station raised the Chinese Communist flag only recently. From News Limited, quote, Victoria Police have been accused of honouring a police state by flying the flag of the Chinese Communist regime on its 70th birthday. Box Hill Station in the city's east raised the flag on October 1st in honour of the National Day of the People's Republic of China and to mark the beginning of the Whitehorse Chinese New Year Festival. As many as 45 million people died in 4 years under Mao Zedong's Great Leap Forward, making him the greatest mass murderer in world history. The Box Hill event was attended by the mayor, state and federal ministers, and local business representatives. End quote. At the end of this video, there is a speech by patriot activist Tom Sewell calling out this treason for what it is. Please stay tuned to watch it. Not only are China flexing their muscles over our land, but also our own politicians are welcoming the prospect of new Chinese overlords. Victorian Premier Dick Year's Daniel Andrews recently signed an agreement under the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, a program of Chinese imperialism. Dick Years claims it is about jobs and economic growth. In truth, it is all about slow Chinese communist takeover of Australia and other countries. Do not expect any punishment for this gross act of treason, at least not in the near future. Despite the obvious threat that China poses to us, every politician in this country is either a fool or a traitor on the level of Dick Years Dan. It is clear to anyone honestly looking at the situation that China are a threat to our nation and sovereignty. They already own large swathes of agricultural land and several pieces of vital infrastructure. It would not take much for them to consider an invasion as a viable option for taking the continent and protecting assets gifted to them by traitor politicians. If global trade slows down, or our political leaders actually stood up to them, they would have every incentive. The problem China have is that our country is large, and controlling it without the consent of the local population is all but impossible. There are already large numbers of Chinese nationals living on our shores, but they are almost entirely contained to the major cities. These are easily brought under heel through sabotage and denial of water and food supply, unless the Chinese army are capable of controlling rural areas as well. Given the sheer amount of territory and a downright hostile local population, it is unlikely they could manage this for any extended period. Fourth generation warfare makes it all but impossible. Even steel starts to rust and decay underwater. Invasions are costly endeavours, as is controlling annexed land, and if world trade really is drying up, then the Chinese economy may not cope. They are just as dependent on the world financial Ponzi scheme as every other country, more so in fact, and any attempt at violent expansion could prove more costly than they could ever hope to afford. This does not mean they will not try. Regimes desperate to keep power will do almost anything to keep it, even a costly and doomed to fail invasion. It is important that we as a nation and a people are ready for what is growing more likely by the day. If the Chinese do attempt to invade, we need to ensure that it is so costly that it is ultimately futile. Even if they manage to take control of some parts of the country for a period, we will eventually send the dragon back into the ocean. As with every other arm of Satan's parasitic 666 globalist system, the Chinese Communist government are doomed to fail. Pyrrhic victories are not victories, and if winning the war costs everything you have, then you have not actually won. I hope you enjoyed the video, share the truth around, and I'll see ya when I see ya.
Anderson, Bennett, Blake, Chapman, Cook, Davey, Ellingworth, Griffiths, Hall, Jones, Kilpatrick, Lawson, Mills, Nelson. These are the names, some of the men that died, that came from Box Hill. Their memorial is not 1 kilometre from this building. As you can see, Box Hill Police Station. Yesterday, the pink pigs inside this building, serving their yellow masters from this suburb, raised the Chinese Communist flag above our own, on our soil, on our land. They do so and continue to do so. They build their buildings and their skyscrapers over us. They buy up our property. They colonize us softly. And we stand there and do nothing. 100,000 people at the MCG. 100,000 people caring about football while their country is slowly conquered. And there's no resistance. Nothing. And we're sick of it. The time will come where justice will be brought to these cowards and traitors in these buildings, these bureaucrats that rule over us, that destroy our nation and sell us out. I talk to old people all the time. I work with old guys in their 60s still slaving away on work sites. And they tell me they've worked their whole lives for this country. And for what? So their children can be minorities in the suburbs that they built. The suburbs they built with their bare hands. And their children are minorities. And the politicians and the academics, they parade it around and they celebrate it. They celebrate us being outnumbered in our suburbs. They call it diversity and multiculturalism. And it's a good thing that there's less of us. Our destruction is in their interest. It's a good thing they raise the flag of a foreign regime on our soil, where our men fought and died for, in Co.Ag and the Somme. And for what? So these cowards and these bureaucrats and the chief and the commanders of this unit can appraise these coward politicians that sit in the building opposite here and in Canberra and in the CBD. What did our men fight and die for? For these people that sit here with fucking smirks on their face. They think it's a joke. They think any resistance to what's happening in this country is a joke. They call us extreme. Extreme for what? Wanting to live in a country that our forefathers fought for and built. They tore mountains down and carved stone out of them and built this city. And for what? For it to be sold piece by piece to these foreign aliens who conquer our lands with a smile on their face. The people in this suburb, the Chinese here, are not the only problem. They're not the only ones doing it. They're just taking advantage of the situation. They call us Guaylo. That means white man, but it's a slur. It means stupid white man. And we must be absolutely stupid to be giving our country away to these people, to be forming ourselves as a minority in the lands that our ancestors built. How much longer must this go on for? How much longer will it take before our people wake up and realize? How many men in the future will stand with us when times get tough and we're a minority because of these cowards and what they've done? Australia is worth fighting for. Our ancestors believe that. The men not 1 kilometre from here whose names are the same names as the men that I served with in the army. The same names of the men in this police station. The same names of the men that we went to high school with and that we worked for at job sites. It's the same names because they're our kin. They're our kith. They fought to the death. And for nothing if we don't win. Australia is worth fighting for. Australia is worth dying for. Australia marches on.